If we are not including people of African descent, black people, then we still have remnants of Jahiliyyah in our hearts. If we are watching the news of police brutality, the prison industrial complex, decades of racism, we're just watching it happen, then we still have Jahiliyyah inside of our hearts. I'm Chaplain Adeel Zeb. Welcome to our series, WoRx, 40 Ways to Reconnect to Yourself and to the Hearts of Others. Today's video will be on racism in the Muslim community. I wanted to begin with the Hadith that is narrated by Abu Hurairah radiallahu ta'ala an, that is found in Sahih Bukhari. That there was a black woman who used to clean the masjid, the janitor. And the Prophet ﷺ asked about her, where is she? And the companions told the Prophet ﷺ that she passed away. And the Prophet ﷺ said, why didn't you tell me? And they said the reason why that they didn't tell him was because they didn't feel that she was significant enough to tell the Prophet ﷺ. This is a very salient point that I want to make in regards to the racism in the Muslim community. The Prophet ﷺ used to create a society that wasn't colorblind. He acknowledged that race was a thing. If you look at the Prophet ﷺ's final sermon, he mentions that no black person is greater than a white person, and no white person is greater than a black person, no Arab than a non-Arab, and vice versa. So he was not colorblind. He was quite aware of what was happening in the Muslim community. There is a very salient hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, ultimately, right? But Abu Dharr and Bilal are having a confrontation, argument, dialogue, and Abu Dharr tells Bilal, "O you son of a black woman." So this news reaches the Prophet ﷺ. And the Prophet ﷺ says, "Ya Abu Dharr, verily you still have inside of you some remnants of Jahiliyyah. You still have inside of you some remnants of ignorance inside of you." Can you imagine if the Prophet of God, who helped you through Allah's will come out of Jahiliyyah, is telling you to your face, you still have some of that ignorance, pre-Islamic ignorance instilled inside of you. If we look into our own lives and we think about who we're interacting with in our MSAs, in our Young Professionals Associations, in our social davats or dinners with our family friends, who are we bringing in to speak and giving agency at our conferences? Not just as performers or comedians, but actual scholars of certain arts and scholars of Islam. Who, if we look and see who are we marrying and who are we encouraging our children to marry and our families to marry, if we are not including people of African descent, black people, then we still have remnants of Jahiliyyah in our hearts. If we are watching the news of police brutality, the prison industrial complex, decades of racism, people being murdered on the streets, Black Lives Matter protests, we are doing nothing. We're just watching it happen. Then we still have Jahiliyyah inside of our hearts. If we're seeing young women and young men of African descent being murdered on television by every cruel method possible, and it does not affect us at all, that our hearts are dead, then we still have Jahiliyyah inside of our hearts. If we revisit the legacy and history of what the African American community as a whole, and specifically what the African American Muslim community has done for the entire civil rights of the entire nation of America, we could never thank them and praise them enough. But what effectively happened in 1965 when President LBJ opened the gates of immigration, so many Muslims came in from South Asia and the Middle East and various places, and they set up their own versions of Islam. And then they started to engage in different activities that were not Islamic, while the black Muslim community set up an Islam that was good da'wah. They set up an Islam people knew. Muslims don't drink. Muslims don't gamble. I've been to conferences with black African American Christian Baptist preachers, and they will tell me that when they were growing up, we couldn't come near Muslim women. Muslim women were hands off. And Muslims were like these angels that walked on this earth. But then the international community comes and opens up all these kinds of haram stores and haram income, and it ruins reputation. And opens up their own Islamic organization, and they just forget about the African American Muslim that did so much, right? From Muhammad Ali to Malcolm X to Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, the list goes on and on and on. And Malcolm himself talks about, may Allah have mercy on his soul and elevate his ranks. He mentions that when he went to Hajj, it was this experience for him, right? Because you're going to a place where everyone is seen to be equal, and it really moved him.
Malcolm, on your trip abroad, you said you sensed a feeling of great brotherhood, and that conceivably you would be working toward integration in this country now. At least this is what you're reported to have said. Have you any comment on it?
I don't think that I ever mentioned anything about working toward integration. If I recall, I pointed out that while I was at Mecca making the pilgrimage, I spoke about the brotherhood that existed at all levels and among all people who were there on that Hajj, who had accepted the religion of Islam. And I pointed out that for what it had done, what the religion of Islam had done for those people over there, despite their complexion differences, that it would probably do America well to study the religion of Islam, and perhaps it could drive some of the racism from this society as it has driven racism from the Muslim society.
Dr. Jamila Karim, who is a Duke PhD, has a book out on negotiating race, and she's contrasting the South Asian American female experience with the Black American female experience. And one of the salient points she mentions in her book that I studied when I was at Hartford Seminary was that there are some times where the African American community does not have the resources or the accessibility to attend all of these Islamic institutes and sessions and classes. And so they don't have the same access as the international community. That's a privilege that we have. Dr. Sherman Jackson, who is the Islamic Studies Chair at the University of Southern California, once in a small group conversation at the Bayan Islamic Seminary in California, he said that the African American community and convert community feels colonized by the international Muslim community. So we have to take ownership of what we are doing that's erasing all the contributions of the Black Muslim community and actually hurting some of that legacy, and thinking about how we are bringing in both communities, the African American community and the international community, together and making our own best practices, using that synergy to create an ultimate Muslim community here in the States. So we covered a lot today. What I want you to take from this is to reach out to the local African American masjid or Islamic organization in your community and start to facilitate dialogue. It can be something simple as a social activity or a service activity, but take that step to work together. And if you're from the African American community, then reach out to the international community and do the same steps. Begin with something very easy. You're going to do some volunteer work, you're going to play laser tag, something that's very easy and accessible to both communities. Let's try to figure out some ways we can work together. If you found value in this program, hit that like button. And if you want more, then watch our videos, WoRx, 40 ways to connect to yourself to the hearts of others. Thank you. Take care. Assalamu alaikum.